Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also, share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Jacob Miller sat on the old wooden porch of his home in the small town of Liberty, Ohio. He held a mug of cold coffee in his hands, and memories flashed before his eyes like frames of an old film. He took a deep breath of the cool March air and closed his eyes, returning to those days when his life was full of light. "Hey, Jake, you stepped on my foot again." Emily's ringing voice echoed across the schoolyard. She was 12 and stood in front of him with her hands on her hips. Her blonde hair was tousled by the wind, and her blue eyes sparkled with indignation. "Sorry, Em, I didn't do it on purpose," he replied, scratching the back of his head. He was 13, and already then he was half a head taller than her. "You're just always spinning under your feet." "It's you who's always spinning under mine," she snorted, but the corners of her lips twitched into a smile. "Okay, I forgive you, but only if you give me your candy." Jacob pulled a crumpled candy out of his pocket and handed it to her. She took it with a triumphant air, as if she had won a great battle. This is how their friendship began, with petty quarrels, shared secrets and sweets that he shared, even when he wanted to eat them himself. As the years passed, the childhood friendship grew into something more. Jacob still remembered that night at prom, when they ran away from the dance and sat on the riverbank, looking at the stars. "Jake, will you ever leave Liberty?" Emily asked, pulling her knees to her chest. Her white dress lightly touched the grass, and there was alarm in her voice. "Only if you come with me," he replied, looking at her. "And you?" "I don't know. Everything is familiar here. Mom, Dad, you. Why leave?" "To see the world, Em, to live as in the books you read." She laughed, throwing her head back. "You're always such a dreamer, Jake." "But if I go, will you protect me?" "Always," he said seriously. "I won't let anyone hurt you." She looked at him for a long time, and at that moment he realized that he loved her. "Not as a friend, not as a neighbor, but as someone without whom I could not imagine my life." Several more years passed. Jacob worked at an auto repair shop, saving money, and Emily studied at the local college to become a nurse. They met every evening, either at her house or at his. One day, sitting on the same porch, he made up his mind. Marry me," he said, pulling a simple silver ring from his pocket. His hand shook, but his voice was firm. She froze, looking at him with wide eyes. "Jake, are you serious?" "It doesn't get any more serious. I love you, since childhood, and I want you to be with me always." Emily threw herself on his neck, almost knocking him off the porch. "Yes, yes, yes, of course I will marry you." They laughed, hugged, and at that moment the world seemed perfect. The wedding was modest in a local church, with friends and family. Emily looked like an angel in a white dress made by her mother. Jacob, in an unusual suit, could not take his eyes off her. "You're beautiful, Em," he whispered as they danced their first dance. "And you are my hero," she answered, clinging to him. "Promise that you will always be with me." "I promise," he said, and it wasn't just a word, it was an oath. Their wedding night took place in a small rented apartment above a store. They lay on a narrow bed, laughed, and talked about everything in the world. "Jake, do you really love me?" she asked, turning to him. Her hair was scattered across the pillow, and her eyes sparkled in the twilight. "No one else will love you the way I love you," he answered, looking into her eyes. "You're everything to me, Em." "And you are for me," she whispered, kissing him. "I will never forget this day." "Me too," he said, hugging her. "We will be happy, I promise." The years after the wedding were simple, but full of warmth. Jacob found a job at an accounting firm in a nearby town, not much, but a steady income. Emily worked as a nurse at a local hospital. They bought a small house in Liberty with a porch, a creaky door, and a garden that Emily dreamed of planting with flowers. "Jake, look at the roses I bought," she shouted one day running into the house with pots in her hands. They will bloom all summer. Are you sure you can raise them? He teased, wiping his hands after working on the old pickup truck. With your help, I definitely can, she answered, smiling. You are my main assistant. Always M, he said, hugging her from behind. Just don't make me dig up the whole garden. I promise, only half. She laughed, and they began to plant roses together, getting dirty with soil and fooling around like children. Sometimes they fought over money because Jacob worked too much, or because Emily forgot to turn off the kitchen light. But the quarrels never lasted long. I'm sorry I yelled, he said, sitting down next to her on the sofa after another disagreement. And forgive me for getting wound up, she answered, laying her head on his shoulder. I'm just tired. I know, Em. Let's go somewhere tomorrow. Just you and me. To the pizzeria. Her eyes lit up. Anywhere, as long as you smile, he said, kissing her forehead. Jacob wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, but he was happy. Because he had Emily. He looked at her when she was sleeping, preparing breakfast, or just sitting with a book, and thought, I am the happiest person in the world. Jake, what are you thinking about? She asked one evening, noticing his thoughtful look. About how much I love you, he replied, taking her hand, and how I don't want to lose it. You won't lose it, she said, squeezing his fingers. I will always be with you. And I'm with you, he promised, forever. He believed her. I believed every word, and I couldn't even imagine that one day these words would become empty, that the life he built with such love would collapse like a house of cards, that the woman he had dedicated everything to would betray him in ways he could never imagine. Jacob opened his eyes, looking at the empty porch. The coffee in the mug has long cooled down. He placed her on the railing and sighed. Jacob Miller stood in front of the mirror in their small bedroom, straightening his tie. It was his first day at his new firm, Harrison and Associates, a large accounting firm in nearby Columbus. It took him a long time to achieve this. Years of work in a car repair shop, evening courses in accounting, sleepless nights over textbooks. And here it is, the offer he dreamed of. A steady paycheck, an office with a view of the city, and a chance to give Emily the life she deserved. What do I look like? He shouted, turning to the door. His voice trembled with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Emily appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. She had just finished washing the dishes after breakfast. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and there were egg yolk stains on her apron. Like a real businessman, she smiled, coming closer. Only the tie is crooked. Give it here. She deftly adjusted the knot, her fingers sliding over the fabric with familiar tenderness. Jacob looked down at her, feeling a warmth spread in his chest. Thank you, Em, he said, taking her hands in his. I couldn't have done it without you. You know that, right? I know, she answered, rolling her eyes, but the smile did not leave her face. You think about me too much, Jake. This is your victory. You deserve this job. Our victory, he corrected, leaning down to kiss her forehead. I want us to have everything. A bigger house, maybe a trip somewhere. You always wanted to see the ocean. The ocean will wait, she laughed, pulling away. The main thing is that you are not late today. Go already, my hero. He grabbed his briefcase, looked at her again, and ran out the door, full of energy. The drive to Columbus took 40 minutes, and all this time he repeated to himself, You did it, Jake. This is your chance. The Harrison and Partners office was located in the city center, a glass building with shiny windows and a sign at the entrance. Jacob walked in, feeling a little out of place among the people in expensive suits. He was sent to the personnel department, where a dry woman with glasses gave him a pass and sent him to the 5th floor. Welcome, Mr. Miller, said a voice behind him as he exited the elevator. Jacob turned around and saw a man of about 40, tall, with neatly styled dark hair and sharp eyes. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than all the furniture in Jacob's house. Hello, Jacob replied, extending his hand. I'm Jacob Miller. Today is my first day. Mark Harrison, the man shook his hand with a slight smile. One of the partners. I've heard good things about you. You're the guy from Liberty who trained as an accountant, aren't you? Yes, it's me, Jacob nodded, a little embarrassed. I tried my best. Modesty is good, Mark said, patting him on the shoulder. But you won't need it here. We value ambition. Follow me, I'll show you your table. Mark led him through the office, a spacious room with rows of desks, humming computers, and people talking on phones or typing. Jacob felt small in this world of numbers and power, but Mark seemed to be in his element. He spoke loudly, joked with colleagues, and gave instructions without losing confidence. Here's your place, Mark said, pointing to the table by the window. You can see half of Columbus from here. Like? Very, Jacob replied, placing his briefcase on the chair. Thank you for taking me. I won't let you down. I'm sure you won't let me down. Mark crossed his arms, looking at him with interest. You have something. Real. Not like these city upstarts. Work hard, and we'll get along. Jacob nodded, feeling a surge of pride. He sat down at the table, opened the laptop, and began to figure out the first tasks. The day flew by quickly numbers, tables, calls. By evening, he already felt like part of the team. The first week passed in a blur. Jacob returned home tired but happy. Emily met him with dinner, asked him about his work, and he told her everything in vivid colors. And this Mark, what is he like? She asked one day, placing a plate of fried chicken in front of him. Charismatic, Jacob replied, cutting off a piece. Knows how to keep everyone on their toes. But it seems normal. Today, he praised my report. Wow, you are already a star, she teased, sitting down opposite him. Look, don't be arrogant there. I'm not arrogant around you, he laughed, taking her hand. You are my main critic. And don't forget about it, she replied, squeezing his fingers. A couple of months later, the company organized a corporate event, a party in honor of a successful quarter. Jacob insisted that Emily go with him. Please, he coaxed while she stood by the closet, sorting through dresses. I want them to see you. You're my wife. Okay, she sighed, pulling out a blue dress. But if it's boring, you take me home. I promise, he said, kissing her cheek. The party took place in a trendy restaurant overlooking the river. Jacob felt awkward among his colleagues in expensive clothes, but Emily looked stunning. Her dress emphasized her figure, and her smile made her the brightest in the room. Jacob, is this your wife? Mark's voice rang out. He walked up to them with a glass of wine in his hand, his gaze lingering over Emily a little longer than necessary. Yes, it's Emily, Jacob replied, putting his arm around her waist. This is Mark, my boss. Nice to meet you, she said, extending her hand. Jake told me a lot about you. I hope only good things, Mark grinned, shaking her hand. You, Emily, are too beautiful for Liberty. How did you get there? I was born there, she answered with a smile, and Jake won't let me go anywhere. Smart guy, Mark said, looking at Jacob. Hold her tight, Miller. You don't see people like this every day. I know, Jacob replied, feeling a slight pang of worry. Mark smiled. The evening went on as usual. Emily danced with Jacob, laughing at his jokes, but he noticed that Mark sometimes glanced in their direction. One time, when Jacob went out to get drinks, he returned to find Mark saying something to Emily, leaning too close to her. What were they chatting about? He asked, trying to sound casual as Mark walked away. Nothing, Emily shrugged. He asked me how it was for me to work in the hospital. He said that his sister is also a nurse. Jacob hummed, looking in Mark's direction. He's strange today. Come on, Jake, she laughed, touching his shoulder. Are you jealous? No, he lied, smiling. It's just, you're mine, Em. And always I will, she answered, kissing him. Let's go dance. He cast aside his doubts, deciding that it was just nerves. Dream job, beloved wife, what could go wrong? He was on top of the world, and nothing seemed to be able to ruin that. After 6 months of working at Harrison and Partners, life seemed to have finally returned to normal. Every morning he got up at 6, kissed the sleeping Emily, drank coffee on the porch, and drove to Columbus to deal with the numbers that were becoming clearer to him. He felt needed not just a cog, but a person who meant something. But in recent weeks, something strange began to happen in the office, and it haunted him. "Jake, will you be late today?" Emily asked, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Her shift at the hospital ended early, and she was waiting for him with dinner. "Maybe," he replied, buttoning his shirt. "Mark said yesterday that we need to close some urgent reports. I don't know what happened there, but everything is on the ears." "This Mark again," she snorted, putting down the cup. "Can he not live a day without you?" "Well, I'm his best accountant," Jacob winked, putting on his jacket. "Kidding. There's just a lot of work. We'll finish soon, and I'll take the day off. Let's go somewhere, I promise." "I'll keep my word," she smiled, standing up to hug him. "Don't overwork yourself there, hero." "I'll try, he said, kissing the top of her head. "See you in the evening." The road to the office was usual, but today he noticed that his hands were gripping the steering wheel more tightly than usual. Something was wrong. Yesterday, Mark called him into his office and threw a stack of documents on the table as if they were burning in his hands. "Miller, this needs to be checked by morning," he said then, without looking at Jacob. "The client is big, there shouldn't be any mistakes." "But there are hundreds of pages," Jacob objected, flipping through the papers. "I won't make it alone." "You'll have time," Mark snapped, finally raising his eyes. "You're a hard worker, right? Or should I find someone else?" "No, I can handle it," Jacob replied, gritting his teeth. He didn't want to lose Mark's favor. He was already hinting at a promotion. "That's nice," Mark smiled, but there was something cold in this smile. "Go to work." Jacob sat up all night on the report, and in the morning Mark praised him in front of the whole team. "Miller is our man," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. The colleagues applauded, but Jacob noticed that some looked at each other with sour faces, especially Jenny, the senior accountant, who sat in the corner and whispered something to her neighbor. This morning he came to the office earlier than usual to deal with a new assignment. On his desk was another folder marked urgent. He opened it and found the numbers didn't add up. The signatures on some of the documents looked strange, as if someone had tried to forge the handwriting. He took one sheet and held it up to the light. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, looking at the blurry lines. "Problems, Miller," a voice came from behind. Jacob winced and turned around. It was Todd, one of the managers, a short guy with always squinted eyes. "No, it's just." Jacob hesitated, lowering the sheet. "There's something wrong here. Look, the signature is crooked." Todd walked over, took the document, and shrugged. "It happens," he said, returning the paper. "Clients are in a hurry. They bet on anything. Don't worry." "But this is an important contract," Jacob objected. "If something is wrong, we can." "Listen," Todd interrupted, lowering his voice. "Don't go where you're not asked. Do your job and keep quiet. Mark doesn't like it when people delve into details." "What if it's a mistake?" Jacob insisted. "I don't want the company to come under attack because of me." "Whether it's a mistake or not is none of your business," Todd snapped, looking into his eyes. "You're new here, Miller. Learn to keep your mouth shut." He walked away, leaving Jacob perplexed. He sat down at the table, staring at the documents. Questions were swirling in my head. What was Todd hiding? Why is Mark pushing so hard? What's going on? At lunchtime, he decided to talk to Jenny. She worked at Harrison and Partners for 10 years and knew all the pitfalls. Jacob found her in the break room, drinking coffee from a paper cup. "Jenny, can I see you for a minute?" he asked, approaching the table. "Sit down," she answered, nodding toward the chair. Her voice was tired but kind. "What do you have?" "Here, look." Jacob handed her one of the documents. "This is fine. The signature looks like it was drawn by a child." Jenny took the paper, squinted, and chuckled. "You're right, it's crooked," she said, returning the paper. "But I advise you, don't touch it." "Why?" He was surprised. "If there is a mistake here, you need to tell Mark." "Error?" She grinned, taking a sip of coffee. Miller, you are sweet, but naive. This is not a mistake. This is, how to say, company policy. Politics? He asked, frowning. What are you talking about? About how Mark and his partners sometimes straighten things out. Jenny lowered her voice, looking around. Don't ask why. I don't know everything myself. But if you want to stay here, don't ask questions. But this is illegal, Jacob whispered, feeling his insides grow cold. If we get caught. We won't be caught, she snapped. Mark knows what he's doing. Just do your job and everything will be fine. Jacob fell silent, looking at her. Jenny finished her coffee, crushed the cup, and stood up. You're a good guy, Jake, she said, looking down at him. Don't ruin your life. And don't tell Mark that I said anything, okay? I understand, he nodded, although his head was in chaos. For the rest of the day, he worked in silence, but his thoughts did not give him rest. In the evening, Mark called him into his office again. Miller, how are things going with the report? He asked, sitting at a huge table. There was a stack of papers on it and a bottle of whiskey in the corner. Almost finished, Jacob answered, standing at the door. But there are a couple of questions there. Questions? Mark raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. Which ones? Well, signatures, Jacob began, feeling his palms sweat. They're strange. I thought it might be worth checking. Mark looked at him for a few seconds and then laughed loudly, almost theatrically. Are you serious, Miller? He said, shaking his head. These are clients, damn it. They sign when they are drunk or their secretaries are crooked. Never mind. But if it's fake, Jacob began. Fake? Mark stood up abruptly, his smile disappeared. Are you accusing me of something? No, I just. Jacob hesitated, stepping back. I want everything to be clean. Everything is already clean, Mark snapped, coming closer. Listen, Miller, I like you. You're trying, and I appreciate it. But don't go where you're not welcome. Understood? Got it, Jacob nodded, lowering his eyes. That's great, Mark patted him on the shoulder, smiling again. Go home, beautiful Emily. I'm guessing you've been waiting too long. Jacob left the office, feeling his heart pounding. He sat in the car for a long time, looking into the darkness. At home, Emily was waiting for him with dinner, baked potatoes, and meat. You're kind of quiet, she said, placing the plate in front of him. What's happened? Nothing, Em, he lied, forcing himself to smile. I'm just tired. Did Mark chase you again? She asked, sitting down next to him. Yes, a little, he answered, picking up a fork. But everything is fine. I'll figure it out soon. You are sure? She looked at him carefully. I'm sure, he said, squeezing her hand. Jacob Miller sat at his desk in the Harrison and Associates office, staring at the computer screen. The last weeks had been difficult. Strange documents, understatements from colleagues, and Mark's pressure hung over him like a thundercloud. He tried not to think about it, convincing himself that everything was under control. But this morning the cloud burst. Miller, to my office. Now, Mark's voice came from behind, sharp as the blow of a whip. Jacob turned around and saw him at the door. The boss's face was tense, his eyes were cold. Did something happen? Jacob asked, standing up. His voice trembled, but he tried to hide it. Go and find out, Mark said, turning around and leaving. Jacob followed, feeling his stomach tighten. There were already two people sitting in Mark's office, Jenny, the senior accountant, and a man in a formal suit whom he did not know. On the table lay a familiar folder, the same one with crooked signatures that he had checked a week ago. Sit down, Miller, Mark said, pointing to a chair. His tone was dry and matter-of-fact. Jacob sat up, looking around. What's happening? He asked, trying to keep his voice even. This is Mr. Crow, our lawyer, Mark nodded at the stranger. What's happening is this. We have problems. Big problems. What problems? Jacob looked at Jenny, but she looked away, staring at the floor. One of our clients filed a complaint, Crow began, opening the folder. They claim that the documents we provided them are fake. Signatures, amounts, everything doesn't add up. And do you know whose signature is on these papers? Jacob felt the blood drain from his face. My, he asked quietly, although he already knew the answer. Yours, Mark confirmed, crossing his arms. And this is not a small thing, Miller. This is fraud, forgery of documents. Do you understand what this means? But I didn't fake anything, Jacob exclaimed, jumping up from his chair. I told you that the signatures are strange. You yourself told me not to get involved in this. Did you say? Mark raised an eyebrow, looking at him with a sneer. I don't remember anything. Jenny, did you hear Miller say anything? No, Jenny answered without looking up. He was just doing his job. This is a lie. Jacob turned to her, feeling anger boiling inside. Jenny, you yourself said that this is company policy, that Mark knows what he's doing. I didn't say that, she answered coldly, finally looking at him. You must have mixed something up, Jake. He froze, looking at her. It was a stab in the back from someone he trusted. Mark coughed to get his attention. Listen, Miller, he said, sitting down at the table. I don't want to drown you. You're a good guy, but someone has to answer for this. The client demands blood, and the police are already on the case. Police? Jacob asked, feeling the ground disappearing from under his feet. Did you call the police? They came on their own, Kuro intervened, adjusting his glasses. This is serious. Fraud. But it's not my fault, Jacob shouted, clenching his fists. You set it all up. Prove it, Mark said calmly, shrugging his shoulders. Do you have any witnesses? Records? Something other than your words? Jacob opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. He had nothing. Only his honesty, which no one needs now. We can agree, Kuro continued, looking at him. If you admit guilt, cooperate with the investigation, you may end up with a fine. Otherwise, the court, God knows how stuck you will be. For what? Because I got caught, Mark answered dryly. Decide quickly, Miller. The feds will be here in an hour. Jacob looked at him, then at Jenny, then at Kuro. The world was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do. An hour later, men in dark suits with FBI badges entered the office. They read him his rights, handcuffed him, and led him away while his colleagues whispered behind his back. At the police station, he was interrogated for 3 hours. The agent, a balding man with tired eyes, asked the same questions. Who forged the signatures, Miller? He asked, tapping his pen on the table. I don't know, Jacob answered, looking at the wall. I was just checking the documents. Who prepared them? The agent continued. Mark, I'm not sure, Jacob hesitated. They came to me already signed. Convenient, the agent chuckled. Why is your signature on all the papers? I confirmed the reports, Jacob said, lowering his head. But I didn't know they were fake. Didn't know or didn't want to know. The agent leaned closer. Listen, guy, we have evidence. Your fingerprints, your logins in the system. Either you take the blame on yourself, or you drag the entire company down with you. What do you choose? Jacob was silent. He understood that he had been set up. Mark, Jenny, Todd, they all knew. But he didn't have a chance to prove it. He ended up signing a deal. 3 years in prison for promoting fraud. The trial was swift in the American system. Such cases often end in guilty pleas to avoid the worst. Emily came to his cell before being sent to prison. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red from crying. Jake, how did this happen? She whispered, pressing her palms against the glass that separated them. I was set up, Em, he said, trying not to break down. Why didn't you fight? She asked, clenching her fists. You are innocent. I have no proof, he replied, looking down. 3 years, she sobbed, wiping her tears. How am I without you? You are strong, he said, pressing his hand to the glass on the other side. Wait for me, okay? I'll come back and we'll fix everything. I'll wait, she promised, looking into his eyes. I love you, Jake. And I you, he answered, feeling his throat tighten. She nodded, and the guard announced that time was up. Jacob watched her leave and thought only one thing. He must survive for her. A week later, he was transferred to Ohio. Cells, bars, gray walls, a new world where he was a number, not a person. He didn't know that Mark had already called Emily, offering support. I didn't know Jenny got a bonus for her silence. He didn't know that his life, so simple and happy, would never be the same. He became a scapegoat, a victim of other people's games. And all he has left is hope for Emily. Jacob Miller stood in the line of prisoners, wearing an orange uniform with the number 78432 on the chest. A medium-security federal prison in Ohio greeted him with the smell of disinfectant, the clanging of metal, and the indifferent glances of guards. "Move, new guy," the guard barked, pushing him in the back. Jacob stepped forward, clutching a thin blanket and a sheaf of paper, all that he had been given for comfort. "Where to go?" he asked, looking around. The voice sounded hoarse, as if it was not his. "Cell 17, right down the corridor," the guard said, already losing interest. "And don't stand on the road if you don't want problems." "Are you new?" the guy asked, putting down the tattered volume. "Yes," Jacob answered, throwing the blanket onto the empty bed. "Jacob Miller." Roy Kelly, the man introduced himself, nodding. "Welcome to hell, boy. Why are you imprisoned?" "Fraud," Jacob said, sitting on the edge of the cot. 3 years. "And you?" "Robbery," Roy shrugged. 10 years, served 7. "Not much left." "A little?" Jacob asked, looking at him in surprise. 7 years is a whole life. You'll get used to it," Roy grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Here time drags on like rubber. The main thing is not to go crazy." Jacob remained silent, looking at the wall. He didn't want to get used to it. He didn't want this to become his life. But there was no choice. Jacob Miller sat on his bunk, staring at the empty wall of his cell. It had been 2 months since he had found himself in a federal prison in Ohio, and each day had been the same. Rising at 6, roll call, laundry work, meager food, an hour in the yard. The silence of Emily's letters continued to press on him like concrete walls, but he tried not to think about it. Nearby, on the bottom bunk, Roy Kelly leafed through his tattered book, the only thing he read over and over again. "Roy, do you ever get tired of this book?" Jacob asked, to somehow break the silence. His voice sounded tired, but he tried to sound cheerful. Roy looked up, grinning wryly. "It's Fahrenheit 451, guy," he said, patting the cover. "It's about a world where books are burned and people forget to think. Every time I find something new. What don't you like to read?" "I love you," Jacob replied, shrugging his shoulders. "It's just not the time right now. My head is full of everything." "Emily, huh?" Roy closed the book, looking at him with understanding. "Still no letters?" "No," Jacob nodded, looking down. "It's already been 6 weeks. I wrote to Kate to find out what's wrong with her, but there's no answer yet either." "It's hard," Roy said, shaking his head. "When there's silence outside, you start to go crazy. I've been through this." "With your son?" Jacob asked, remembering their previous conversation. "Yeah," Roy leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. "When I was imprisoned, he was a teenager. I wrote for the first couple of months, got angry, and asked why I ruined everything. And then he stopped. Not a word for 7 years. Why?" Jacob looked at him, feeling something clench inside him. "Because betrayal hurts, kid," Roy replied, looking at the ceiling. "I let him down. He robbed a store to pay off a debt, thinking he was going to get a ride. And in the end, he left him with a mother who drank and a bunch of debts. He hated me." "But you wanted to help," Jacob said quietly. "I wanted to," Roy nodded, "but it turned out that I broke everything." People don't forgive when they are abandoned, even if you don't do it on purpose. Your Emily might be angry too. "She's not like that," Jacob argued, clenching his fists. "She promised to wait. She and I have been together since childhood. She won't quit." "Maybe he won't," Roy shrugged. "But 3 years is a long time. People change, Miller, even the ones you love." Jacob fell silent, looking at his hands. He didn't want to believe it. Emily was his rock, his light. But Roy's words touched something inside an old fear that he had been pushing away. "How are you coping?" he asked finally, looking up. 7 years without a son, without a family. How did you not break? It's broken, Roy grinned, showing the scar above his eyebrow. This came to me in the first year when I got into a fight with one goat. But then I realized, either you learn to live with it or you will be devoured here. I started reading, thinking, and keeping my head cool. You learn too, Jake. Otherwise, you won't survive. I have no choice, Jacob said, pursing his lips. I have to survive. For her sake. Then stick with it, Roy replied, patting the book. Find what is holding you back. Letters, memories, at least something. Jacob nodded, feeling that Roy was right. The next day, in the yard, he decided to try it. She and Roy sat on the bench, watching the other prisoners play basketball or just hang out in the corners. Roy, tell me something, Jacob said, leaning against the wall. At least about my son, at least about anything. Tired of being silent. Okay, Roy agreed, rubbing his chin. My boy, Josh, loved cars, always tinkering with my old Ford. Once I disassembled the engine right in the yard, I had to put it back together for 3 days. He was 12, and he already knew more than me. Sounds like me, Jacob smiled for the first time in weeks. When I was a child, I also fixed everything. Emily laughed and said I smelled like gasoline. Good girl, Roy said, looking at him. Tell me about her. What does she like? Roses, Jacob answered, closing his eyes. We have a whole garden at home. She planted them, watered them, and talked to them like children, and also books. I love novels where everything ends well. She said that life is already difficult, at least let there be happiness in books. Smart, Roy nodded. What did you give her? Flowers, of course, Jacob laughed quietly, and all sorts of small things, earrings, bracelets. I gave her a simple ring for her wedding, but she still wears it. Or worse. He paused and Roy tapped him on the shoulder. He wears it, Guy, he wears it, he said firmly. Don't drive away dark thoughts. She's there, waiting for you. Just give her time. God willing, Jacob whispered, looking at the sky beyond the barbed wire. Jacob Miller sat on the edge of his bunk, holding in his hands the only letter from Emily, the one that had arrived 2 months ago. The paper was already frayed at the edges from how often he reread it. Every word, every curl of her handwriting was salvation for him in the gray monotony of prison. But there were no new letters. 3 months of silence, 3 long, painful months that dragged on like an eternity. He wrote to her every week, sent letters to Kate and Trevor, but no answers came. The silence outside became louder than the walls around. Roy, how long do we have to wait? He asked, without taking his eyes off the letter. His voice was quiet, almost broken. Roy Kelly lay on the bottom bunk with his arms crossed behind his head. He had just returned from work in the workshop repairing dining room chairs and looked tired. The mail is here like the weather, boy, he answered, looking at the ceiling. Sometimes it comes, sometimes it doesn't. How many letters have you sent? 10, Jacob said, clutching the paper. 10 for Emily, 3 for Kate, 2 for Trevor, and nothing.
Roy sat up, rubbing his neck.
This is weird. Even if your sister is busy, a friend would answer. And the wife? Has she completely disappeared? I don't know, Jacob whispered, feeling his throat tighten. She promised to wait. I don't understand what's going on. Maybe something happened, Roy said, looking at him carefully. Illness, work, God knows what. Or the mail is rotting somewhere in the corner. What if not? Jacob looked up, and fear flashed in them. What if she forgot or don't want to write? You don't believe it yourself, Roy replied, shaking his head. I see how you talk about her. She's everything to you. These people don't forget. Then why is she silent? Jacob exclaimed, jumping out of his bed. He began to walk around the cell 3 steps forward, 3 back. 3 months, Roy. I'm rotting here, and she won't even write a word. Calm down, Roy said, standing up and putting a hand on his shoulder. You're pushing yourself too hard. Sit down, let's talk. Jacob stopped, exhaled, and sat back down. Roy sat down next to him, looking at him with that mixture of sternness and understanding that Jacob had already learned to appreciate. Tell me what was in her last letter, Roy said. Maybe there's something there, some kind of hint. Jacob took the letter, unfolded it, and began to read out loud, although he knew every line by heart. Dear Jake, your letter arrived yesterday, and I cried reading it. Everything is quiet at home without you. The roses are not blooming, yet spring has just begun. I work as usual, but every evening I sit on the porch and think about you. Kate stopped by, brought a cake. Trevor promised to fix the fence. I'm holding on, Jake. Waiting for you. Love, Emily. He finished and looked at Roy, waiting for some kind of answer. Sounds normal, Roy said with a shrug. She's bored, she's waiting. There's nothing wrong with that. Then why doesn't he write anymore? Jacob asked, clutching the letter in his hands. She knew how much I needed her words. That's all I have here. Maybe she doesn't know what to say, Roy suggested. Or she's afraid that her letters will upset you. People sometimes remain silent when they themselves are in pain. Emily is not like that, Jacob countered, shaking his head. She always said what she felt. Even when they quarreled, she was not silent. Then we just have to wait, Roy said, looking into his eyes. Or, there is another option. Which? Jacob frowned. That someone is interfering, Roy answered, lowering his voice. Mail passes through a lot of hands here. If someone outside doesn't want you to receive letters, they can keep them. Who? Jacob asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. Mark? Why not? Roy shrugged. You said he set you up. Maybe he's making sure you don't mess around here. But why does he need Emily? Jacob exclaimed, standing up again. She knows nothing about the company. He doesn't know, but he called her, Roy recalled. You said it yourself. Maybe he's playing his own game, or just a creep. Jacob froze, looking at him. The thought of Mark hanging around Emily was like a knife in his chest. He remembered their farewell, her words that Mark had offered help. What if she accepted this help? What if he took advantage of her loneliness? No, he said out loud, shaking his head. She wouldn't. She loves me. I'm not saying she betrayed, Roy clarified, raising his hands. Just think, if letters don't arrive, it's not always her fault. Jacob sat up, feeling dizzy. He didn't want to suspect Emily, but doubts had already taken root. In the evening, he wrote another letter short, desperate. I don't know if my letters are getting through. You don't write, and I'm going crazy. If something is wrong, tell me. If anyone is bothering you, let me know. I love you. Jake. He gave it to the guard the next day, but deep down he knew that this might be the last letter he sent with hope. As the days passed, the silence became unbearable. Even Roy noticed how Jacob had changed, become quieter, sharper. Hey, kid, don't shut yourself up, Roy said one night at dinner, as they sat around the table with trays. You're still alive, and that's already something. Alive, Jacob nodded, picking at the potatoes with a spoon. But I feel dead without her. You're not dead as long as you hope, Roy replied, looking at him. And you hope, I see. I hope so, Jacob whispered. But how much is possible? As much as you need, Roy said firmly. I've been waiting for 7 years for my son to write. I haven't written, but I'm still waiting. You wait for your Emily. She's worth it. Jacob looked at him and nodded. Roy was right, Emily was worth everything. But that evening, lying on his bed, he could not sleep. He reread her letter one last time, feeling the words slip from his hands like sand. This was the last thing that connected him with her, and he was afraid that this connection would be broken. The next morning, in the yard, he approached Roy, who was smoking a rolled-up cigarette, leaning against the fence. Roy, if she doesn't answer, what should I do? He asked quietly, looking at the barbed wire. To live, Roy answered, exhaling smoke. For your own sake. But I believe she will answer. Give her a chance. I will, Jacob nodded, clenching his fists. But if not, I don't know what I'll do next. You will, Roy said, slapping him on the shoulder, because you are stronger than you think. Jacob Miller stood at the window of his cell, looking at the gray sky beyond the barbed wire. Today was his last day in a medium-security federal prison in Ohio. 3 years, 1095 days flew by like an eternity, and like a moment at the same time. He counted each one, marking the time with letters that never arrived and conversations with Roy, who became his anchor in this concrete hell. Now, on the morning of his release, he felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Freedom was close, but something inside whispered that it would no longer be the same as he remembered. "Well, boy, are you ready?" Roy's voice came from the bottom bunk. He sat cross-legged and looked at Jacob with his usual crooked grin. "I don't know," Jacob answered, turning to him. His voice trembled, although he tried to hide it. "I've been here for 3 years, but it seems like a lifetime. It's like I forgot how to live out there." "I haven't forgotten," Roy said, standing up and stretching. His joints cracked, showing his age. "You're just used to these walls. But as soon as you leave, everything will come back. You'll see." "I hope so," Jacob nodded, clenching his fists. "Thank you, Roy, for everything. Without you, I would go crazy here." "Come on," Roy waved his hand, but warmth flashed in his eyes. "You helped me too. Reminds me that there are still good people, even here." Jacob smiled weakly. Roy was rough and abrasive, but there was something real about him, like an old friend he'd known all his life. For 3 years they went through a lot. Fights with Butch, nights without sleep, conversations about the past. Roy talked about his son Josh and how much he missed him, and Jacob shared memories of Emily, her laughter, her roses, her promise to wait. Now he was leaving, and Roy remained for another 3 years. "Will you write to me?" Jacob asked, looking at him. "When will you leave?" "If I don't forget," Roy grinned, but then nodded seriously. "I'll write, Jake, and you find your Emily, and tell her that old Roy told her not to be silent anymore." "I'll tell you," Jacob promised, feeling a lump in his throat. "If she's still waiting." "Waiting," Roy said firmly. "I'm sure of it. You are too good to be forgotten." Jacob wanted to object, but remained silent. In 3 years, he received only one letter from Emily, the first one, which arrived a month after his imprisonment. Then there was silence. He wrote to her hundreds of times, sent letters to Kate and Trevor, but there were no answers. Roy assumed the mail was being intercepted, but Jacob feared the worst, that Emily had simply walked out of his life. Today, he will find out the truth. The guard knocked on the bars, interrupting their conversation. "Miller, get ready," he said dryly. "We'll be released in an hour." "I'm coming," Jacob replied, picking up his small bag. There was little in it. A couple of letters, a pencil, a tattered photograph of Emily, which he had traded with another prisoner for a pack of cigarettes. He turned to Roy and extended his hand. "Goodbye, old man," he said, trying to smile. "Don't say goodbye, see you soon," Roy corrected, shaking his hand firmly. "Go, Jake, and don't look back." Jacob nodded, feeling his eyes sting. He left the cell, following the guard down a long corridor. His footsteps echoed loudly from the walls, and the voices of other prisoners followed him with shouts. "Good luck, accountant," and "Don't come back." He didn't look back, but he felt Roy's gaze until the last turn. In the delivery room, the things he came with 3 years ago were waiting for him. Jeans, a shirt, an old wallet with $5 and keys to a house that, perhaps, was no longer his. He changed his clothes, feeling how his clothes fit unusually loosely. He had lost weight over the years. The guard handed him an envelope with documents and said, "Sign here. You are free from 10 in the morning. Bus to Columbus below." "Thank you," Jacob replied, signing with a trembling hand. The clock showed 9:45. 15 minutes until freedom. He went out into the yard where Kate and Trevor were waiting for him. Seeing them, he froze. My sister looked older, her hair was shorter, the wrinkles around her eyes were deeper. Trevor, his best friend, stood next to him, still broad-shouldered, but with a gray beard. They rushed towards him as soon as the gate opened. "Jake!" Kate shouted, hugging him so tightly that he almost suffocated. "Lord, you're alive." "Alive," he smiled, hugging her back. "It's good to see you, sister." "Damn, brother, you're skinny as a mop," Trevor said, slapping him on the back. "We thought you had completely disappeared there." "Almost," Jacob answered, feeling the warmth of their presence dispel the cold of the prison. Thank you for coming. Where can we go? Kate said, wiping her tears. Let's go home, Jake. You deserve a rest. They got into Trevor's old pickup truck, and Jacob took a seat by the window, looking out at the passing fields. Freedom smelled of grass, gasoline, and dust smells he hadn't smelled in 3 years. But joy was mixed with anxiety. He turned to Kate, who sat between him and Trevor. Kate, where is Emily? He asked quietly. Why isn't she with you? Kate and Trevor looked at each other, and the silence hit him harder than any answer. Kate coughed, looking at the floor. She's home, Jake, she finally said. But you need to talk to her. Myself. What does talk mean? He frowned, feeling his heart speed up. Was she waiting for me? Have you received my letters? We got it, Trevor nodded, squeezing the steering wheel. And they wrote to you. Kate sent letters every 2 weeks. Me too. But you didn't answer. What? Jacob turned to him sharply. I didn't receive anything. Just one letter from Emily in the first month, and that's it. How is this? Kate was surprised, looking at him with wide-open eyes. We wrote, Jake. I even called the prison and asked if the letters were being delivered. I was told everything was fine. Nothing happened, he said, gritting his teeth. I thought you left me. Emily stopped writing too. I went crazy there. Oh my God, Kate whispered. Calm down, brother, Trevor interrupted, raising his hand. Deal with Emily first. We don't know what was there. She's changed, Jake. Has it changed? He asked, looking at his friend. How? You'll see for yourself, Kate said, squeezing his hand. Just be ready. 3 years is a long time. Jacob fell silent, looking out the window. The drive to Liberty took an hour, but it seemed to him like an eternity. When the pickup stopped at a familiar house with a porch, he felt his legs give way. The house looked the same. The white paint was a little peeling. Emily's roses were blooming along the fence. But something was wrong. The air seemed heavier, the silence thicker. Go, he said to Kate and Trevor, opening the car door. I myself. You are sure? Kate asked, looking at him with concern. I'm sure, he nodded, forcing himself to smile. Thank you for bringing it. See you later. They drove away, leaving him alone. Jacob walked up to the porch, feeling his heart pounding. He knocked on the door once, twice. Silence. Then footsteps, and the door opened. Emily stood in front of him. Her hair was longer than he remembered, her eyes tired, but still the same blue. She froze, looking at him, and something flashed in her gaze, surprise, fear, guilt. Jake, she whispered, squeezing the door frame. You're back. Back, Em, he said, feeling his voice tremble. 3 years. I'm home. She nodded, but did not rush to him as he had dreamed. Didn't hug, didn't cry. She just stood there, looking at him, and this silence cut deeper than a knife. Can I come in? He asked, taking a step forward. Of course, she replied, retreating. Come in. He entered, looking around. The house was the same, but different. New curtains, a foreign smell in the air. There was a cup of coffee on the table. He turned to her, feeling his insides tighten. What's going on? He asked quietly. Why didn't you write? Why didn't you answer? Jake, She began, looking down. I wrote, many times, but you didn't answer. Didn't answer, he exclaimed, taking a step towards her. I didn't receive anything. I wrote to you every week, Em, every damn week. What? She raised her eyes, and shock flashed in them. But how? I sent letters, Jake. I even went to prison once, but they told me that you refused visits. Refused? He froze, feeling the blood run cold in his veins. I never refused. I waited for you every day. Emily covered her face with her hands, trembling. Jacob looked at her, one question running through his head, who did this? But then he noticed something. There was no wedding ring on her hand. His rings. He said, feeling his voice become hoarse. Where is your ring? She lowered her hands, looking at him with pain. He said, trying to speak calmly. Where is your ring? She froze, looking at him. Her fingers moved to her left hand, but there was nothing there. Emily swallowed, looked away, and answered quietly. Jake, let's sit down. We need to talk. I don't want to sit down, he said, feeling anxiety boiling inside. Just tell me why he's not there. You promised to wait, Em. What's happened? I was waiting, she answered, looking at the floor. I waited the first year. I wrote to you, sat here alone, thinking that you would answer. But you were silent, Jake. Not a word. I didn't know what to think. Was he silent? He asked, taking a step towards her. I wrote to you every week, Em. Every damn week until I got tired of the silence. I thought it was you who abandoned me. I didn't quit, she said, looking up. Pain flashed through them. I sent letters, called the prison. They told me that they don't want to see me. I even went there once, but the guard kicked me out and said you refused. This is nonsense, he snapped, clenching his fists. I didn't refuse. I've been waiting for you, Emily. Do you have any idea what I went through there? She fell silent, biting her lip. Jacob saw her struggling with herself, wanting to explain, but not knowing how. He also didn't know who to believe, her, himself, or this damned system that broke their connection. Okay, he said, exhaling. Let's say the letters are missing. Let's say someone lied. But the ring, why did you take it off? Emily turned away, looking at the roses outside the window. Her shoulders dropped, and she said quietly, because I'm tired, Jake. 3 years alone, without you, without an answer. I couldn't go on like this. Tired? He frowned, feeling a chill running down his back. What are you tired of? From me? From us? From emptiness, she answered, turning to him. You were there, I was here, and Mark came. Mark? Jacob froze. The name hit like a hammer. My boss. Not right away, she said, squeezing her hands. He called first and offered help. I sent him away. But then, a year later, he arrived. He said he wanted to make amends. I brought money and food. I was broke, Jake. I was scared. And you took his handouts. He asked, trying to keep his voice even. From the man who destroyed me. I didn't mean to, she answered, looking into his eyes. But I was alone. You disappeared. The letters did not arrive. He was. He was nearby. Jacob looked at her, feeling his stomach tighten. He didn't want to hear any more, but he had to know. What happened, Em? He asked quietly. Between you. Tell. She looked away, and silence hung between them, heavy as concrete. Finally, she spoke, almost in a whisper. I was with him, Jake. Last summer. It happened, and I immediately regretted it. He froze, feeling his blood run cold. Jake, She began, taking a step towards him, but he raised his hand to stop her. Don't, he said, feeling his voice becoming alien. You just don't need to explain anything. I don't love him, she said, and tears streamed down her cheeks. It was a mistake. I was lost. I thought you wouldn't come back to me. And I'm back, he answered, looking into her eyes. I sat there, in that hole, holding on to you. Every day, Em. And you are like this. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Jacob looked at her, feeling anger and pain mingling inside. He didn't shout or break dishes that would have been too easy. Instead, he felt an emptiness that grew with every word she said. I can't stay here, he said finally, turning away. I need to leave. Jake, wait, she said, grabbing his sleeve. Don't go. We can figure it out. Figure out? He turned to her, pulling his hand away. You slept with him, Em. With the man for whom I lost 3 years. How should I deal with this? I didn't want to lose you, she whispered, looking at him. I love you, Jake. Still love. You love, he repeated, and the word sounded bitter. He walked to the door, feeling his legs fill with lead. Emily called after him. Jake, please. I don't know how to live without you. But he didn't stop. He went out onto the porch, breathed in the cold air, and looked at the roses along the fence. They were the same as before, but now they seemed foreign to him, like her, like this house. Jacob Miller stood outside the Liberty County Courthouse, clutching a folder of documents. A week has passed since he left home, leaving Emily among her roses and broken hopes. He never returned there. He spent the night with Trevor, then with Kate, trying to pick himself up in pieces. Divorce was inevitable, and today she and Emily had to put an end to it. There were no shouts, no long conversations, only a cold, tired silence that spoke more than any words. Kate was waiting for him in the car, leaning against the door of her old sedan. Her face was gloomy, but she tried not to show pity. "Are you ready, Jake?" she asked, adjusting her scarf. Her voice was soft, but there was concern in it. "Yes," he nodded, looking at the courthouse. "It's time to finish." "If anything happens, I'm here," she said, squeezing his shoulder. "Just tell me." "Thank you, Kate," he replied, forcing himself to smile. "I can handle it." He stepped inside, feeling his legs become heavy. The courtroom was small, several rows of wooden benches, a table for the judge, a couple of flags in the corner. Emily was already there, sitting in the front row, looking at the floor. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and her fingers nervously fiddled with the edge of her bag. She looked up as he approached, but didn't say anything. He was also silent, sitting down 2 seats from her. The judge, an elderly woman with a tired face, entered through a side door and took her seat. She leafed through the papers, cleared her throat, and began. "The case is Miller v. Miller. Application for divorce by mutual consent. Any objections?" "No, Your Honor," Emily said quietly, without looking up. "No," Jacob echoed, feeling that the voice sounded foreign. "Property?" the judge asked, looking over her glasses. "There's nothing to share," Emily answered, swallowing. "Do you confirm, Mr. Miller?" The judge turned to him. "Yes," he nodded. The judge nodded, signed the papers, and looked at them. "The divorce has been formalized. The decision will take effect in 30 days. Good luck to both of you." She stood up and walked away, leaving them in silence. Jacob looked at the table where the documents lay, feeling like something inside was breaking. That was all the end of their story, which began with childhood games and vows under the stars. Emily stood up, packing her bag, and turned to him. "Jake," she said quietly, "Don't, Em," he interrupted, looking into her eyes. "Everything has been said." She fell silent, nodded, and walked towards the exit. He watched her leave, feeling the old pain flare up again. And then he said, not loudly, not with anger, but simply as a fact, "The way I loved you, no one else will love you." Emily froze at the door, her shoulders trembling. She didn't turn around, but he knew she heard. These were the words from their first night, the words he whispered to her as they lay in that small apartment, full of hope. Now they sounded like goodbye. She opened the door and walked out, leaving him alone. Jacob took the documents, put them in a folder, and went outside. Kate was waiting for him, leaning against the car. "Well?" she asked, looking at his face. "That's it," he answered, opening the door. "Divorced." "How did it go?" She got behind the wheel, starting the engine. "Silently," he said, looking out the window. "There is nothing to share." She nodded and drove to her house on the outskirts of Liberty. Jacob looked at the familiar streets, but they seemed foreign. Kate lived in a small house with 2 bedrooms and a veranda, which always smelled of coffee. She insisted that he move in with her until he got back on his feet. "Here is your room," she said, opening the door to a small bedroom with a bed and an old chest of drawers. "Not chic, but you can live." "Thank you, Kate," he replied, setting the bag down on the floor. "I won't stay long. I'll find a job, film something." "Take your time," she said, looking at him seriously. "You just left. Give yourself time." "I had plenty of time," he smiled bitterly. 3 years. Enough. She sighed, but didn't argue. In the evening, they sat on the veranda, drinking coffee from old mugs. Kate looked at the sunset, and Jacob looked at his hands, still clutching the wedding ring that he had never taken off. "Did you leave him?" she asked, nodding at the ring. "For now, yes," he answered, twirling it on his finger. "I don't know why. Habit, probably." "Maybe later," he said, putting his hand in his pocket. "Not ready yet." "I understand," she nodded. "What's next, Jake? What will you do?" "I don't know," he answered, looking at the horizon. Look for a job. Trevor said there's a spot in the auto repair shop. I'll start with this. Okay, she said, smiling. And I'll be there. And Trevor too. You are not alone. Thank you, he said, feeling her words dispel the chill inside a little. Glad I have you. He spent the night in the new room, lying on a narrow bed and looking at the ceiling. The silence was different, not prison-like, not oppressive, but still empty. He thought about Emily, about her last words in court, about how she left without looking back. He left her the house, the car, everything they had, not because he was generous, but because he didn't want to carry this burden with him. But the ring, he kept the ring for himself, as a reminder, like pain. Jacob Miller sat on the veranda of Kate's house, looking out at the morning fog creeping over Liberty. A month has passed since he divorced Emily and moved in with his sister. The days passed slowly, but not as painfully as in the first weeks. Kate and Trevor were there, not intrusively, but firmly, like anchors keeping him from falling into the void. Today, Trevor had promised to stop by to discuss some part-time work, and Jacob was waiting for him, sipping coffee from an old mug. The door creaked and Kate stepped out onto the veranda with a plate of hot pancakes. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and there were stains of flour on her apron. Eat, Jake, she said, placing the plate in front of him. You're as thin as a stick. We need to put at least a little meat on the bones. Thank you, Kate, he smiled weakly, taking the pancake. You're just like your mother. Someone has to take care of you, she answered, sitting down next to a mug of tea. Trevor will be there soon. Yes, he said, by 10. Jacob nodded, looking at his watch. He says there is work in the workshop. Nothing special, but it's a good start. This is already something, Kate said, sipping her tea. You always loved cars. Do you remember how you fixed your dad's tractor as a child? I remember, he grinned, taking a bite of the pancake. I was about 13 years old, and I already thought that I could open my own workshop. Stupid dreams. Why stupid? Kate frowned, looking at him. You were good at this, Jake. And now you can. Just start small. Small, he repeated, looking at his hands. After prison and a criminal record, it's not so easy, Kate. Who will trust me with the matter? People who know you, she answered firmly. Trevor, I and the guys are in town. You're not some bandit. You are honest, and it shows. Jacob remained silent, but her words touched something inside. For a long time, he had not thought about his childhood dreams about a workshop where he could repair cars and build something of his own. 3 years in prison and Emily's betrayal burned that spark out of him. But Kate looked at him with such faith that he almost believed her. The noise of the engine interrupted their conversation. Trevor's old pickup truck pulled up to the house and his friend climbed out, wiping his hands on his jeans. His beard became thicker, but his eyes still sparkled with the same energy as in his youth. Hello, family, he shouted, climbing onto the veranda. Jake, are you ready for work and defense? Hey, Trev, Jacob replied, standing up. Depends on what you came up with. Sit down, I'll tell you, Trevor said, plopping down on a chair and taking a pancake from the plate. Kate, you are gold. Where's my coffee? Pour it yourself, she snorted, but smiled. I'm not your servant. Trevor laughed, poured himself some coffee from the thermos on the table, and turned to Jacob. Listen, brother, he began, taking a sip. Old Joe has an opening in his off-site workshop. Nothing complicated, change the oil, spin the wheels, minor repairs. They don't pay much, but it's okay for a start. What do you say? Joe? Jacob asked, frowning. The one who always grumbled at us for racing on his field? He's the one, Trevor nodded, grinning. But he remembers you. I put in a good word and said you were out and looking for a job. He agrees to take it, even with your criminal record. Seriously? Jacob looked at him, feeling hope stir within him, and he didn't ask, why did you sit? I asked, Trevor shrugged. I told the truth. You were framed, you served time for someone else's guilt. Joe himself was in jail for fighting in his youth, so he's not one to judge. The main thing is to work honestly. Honestly, I can, Jacob said, twirling the mug in his hands. Thank you, Trev. This, this means a lot. Come on, Trevor waved his hand. You would have done the same for me. Tomorrow we'll go and talk to Joe. If everything comes together, you'll start this week. Great, Jacob nodded, feeling the weight on his shoulders become a little lighter. I haven't held a wrench for a long time. We need to remember. You'll remember, Trevor said, clapping him on the back. You've always been an ace at this. Kate watched them, smiling at the corner of her lips. When Trevor finished his coffee and went inside for more, she turned to Jacob. Do you see? She said quietly. I told you that people will help you. This is your chance, Jake. Chance, he repeated, looking at her. What then? A part-time job is not a workshop. Who said that you can't go to the workshop? She objected, leaning towards him. Start small. Work for Joe, save money, learn again. You dreamed of this your own business, where you are your own boss. I dreamed, he nodded, remembering how as a child he drew a sign, Miller's Auto Repair, in a notebook. But that was a long time ago, Kate. I'm different now. You're the same, she said firmly. I just forgot. I remember you fixing my bike when I was 10. You then said, I'll open a workshop and everyone will come to me. You can do it, Jake. He looked at her, feeling her words break through his fatigue. Maybe she's right. Maybe he hasn't completely lost himself yet. Trevor returned with a new mug of coffee and plopped back down into his chair. What are you whispering about? He asked, narrowing his eyes. About dreams, Kate answered, smiling. Jake wants his own workshop. Seriously? Trevor raised an eyebrow at his friend. This is the case. I would invest. I can even get you clients. Don't rush your horses, Jacob laughed, feeling light for the first time in a long time. First, we need to get a job from Joe. You'll take it, Trevor said confidently. We'll see then. I know a couple of guys who fix cars at home. Maybe we can cooperate over time. We'll see, Jacob nodded, taking a sip of his coffee, step by step. They sat for another hour, chatting about trivial things, the weather, old stories from their youth, how Trevor once got his truck stuck in the mud. Jacob listened, occasionally putting in a word, and felt the warmth of their support envelop him. It was not a loud rescue, just presence, simple conversations, faith in him. Kate reminded of the past. Trevor pulled into the future. For the first time in months, he didn't think about Emily every minute. That evening, after Trevor left, Jacob stayed on the veranda with Kate. She brought an old album with photographs tattered, with yellowed pages. Look, she said, opening it. Here you are with your dad's tractor. Do you remember? The photo was of a thin teenager with a wrench, smiling from ear to ear. There was a tractor nearby, which he spent 3 days repairing. Jacob ran his finger over the photo, feeling something warm stir within him. I remember, he said quietly. I thought back then that I could do anything. And you can, Kate replied, looking at him. Just start again, Jake. You have us. Emily Miller, now Emily Harrison, stood at the huge window in Mark's new home on the outskirts of Columbus. The house was luxurious. High ceilings, marble floors, dark wood furniture that she could never afford. It had been 6 months since she and Jacob had divorced, and 3 months since she and Mark had gotten married. At first, everything had been like a dream, but now she felt the walls of this house closing in around her like a golden cage. When Mark proposed to her, she didn't know how to respond. He appeared in her life again a couple of months after the divorce, confident, with flowers and expensive gifts. He came to her house, called her, and said that he wanted to fix everything. Emily, you deserve better, he said one day, standing on the porch of her old house in Liberty. In his hands was a bouquet of roses, not the kind she planted with Jacob, but huge, perfect ones from the store. I am to blame for what happened to Jacob. Give me a chance to make it up to you. I don't know, Mark, she answered, clutching the door frame. Everything is too complicated. Nothing complicated, he smiled, handing her the flowers. You are alone, I am alone. We can start again. I'll take care of you. She took the roses, feeling the loneliness of recent years weighing on her. Jacob left, leaving her with a house, a mortgage, and emptiness. Mark was there persistent, confident, with promises that sounded like salvation. A month later, she said yes, and he immediately took her to Columbus, away from Liberty and her memories. The first time was like a fairy tale. Mark showered her with gifts, gold earrings, silk dresses, a new car. He took her to restaurants, showed her to friends, and boasted about how beautiful his bride was. The wedding took place in a fashionable hall overlooking the river, 100 guests, champagne, a dress for $3,000. Emily smiled in the photographs, but deep down she felt a strange emptiness. "Are you happy?" Mark asked on their first night, lying next to her in the huge bed. His voice was warm, but there was a hint of possessiveness in it. "Yes," she answered, forcing herself to smile. "Thank you, Mark, for everything." "This is just the beginning," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll give you everything you want." She nodded, but she couldn't help thinking about Jacob, his simple words, the way he looked at her in their small apartment after the wedding. Mark was different. He didn't look, he owned. A week after the wedding, everything changed. Mark started with little things, asking where she goes, who she talks to. Then it became sharper. "Emily, you don't have to work," he said one day at dinner, cutting off a piece of steak. They were sitting in the dining room, where the table was too big for two. "But I like my job," she objected, looking at him. She was still a nurse at the local hospital, although she commuted there from Columbus. "I don't want to sit at home." "You are my wife," he answered, without looking up from his plate. "I earn enough. Why do you need this running around?" "This is not running," she said, clutching her fork. "This is my life, Mark. I love helping people." "Now your life is with me," he snapped, looking at her coldly. "I don't want my wife to smell like a hospital and run shifts." "Quit." "What if I don't want to?" she asked, feeling protest boiling inside. "Whether you want it or not, this is not discussed," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I said quit. Tomorrow." She looked at him, expecting him to smile and say he was joking. But his face was stony. The next day, she called the hospital and quit, feeling like a part of herself was leaving with the job. Mark was pleased. He bought her a new bracelet, kissed her on the cheek, and said that she did the right thing. But Emily felt empty. The days dragged on monotonously. Mark went to the office early and returned late. She stayed at home, cooked, cleaned, looked out the window. He forbade her to go to Liberty without him, saying that there was the past there, and she needed to think about the future. Friends from the hospital called less often. She didn't know what to tell them. Mark became her world, but this world was small. "Where are you going?" he asked one day when he saw her take the car keys. She wanted to go into town, just to go shopping. "To the center," she answered, putting on her coat. "I want to take a walk." "One?" He frowned, crossing his arms. "No need. I don't want you to wander around anywhere." "Mark, I'm not a child," she said, looking at him. "I need to leave the house." "You are my wife," he answered, stepping towards her. "And I decide what you need. Sit down, I'll bring you whatever you want." She wanted to object, but his tone harsh, authoritative silenced her. She put the keys back and sat down on the sofa, feeling like something was breaking inside. Mark left, slamming the door, and she remained, looking at her hands. A new ring glittered on his finger, gold, with a diamond, heavy as shackles. He started calling her a trophy. At first it sounded like a joke at parties with colleagues. He would put his arm around her waist and say, "This is my main prize." Everyone laughed and she smiled, but each time the word cut deeper. She was a beautiful picture in his life, without a voice, without freedom. Mark was jealous of her every look, every call. One day he saw her talking on the phone with a friend and snatched the receiver. "Who was it?" he asked, looking down at her. "Sarah, from the hospital," she answered, feeling her heart pounding. "We were just chatting." "You don't need to chat with her," he said, throwing the phone on the table. "She's from your old life. Forget." "Mark, these are my friends," she objected, standing up. "You can't stop me." "I can," he snapped, looking into her eyes. "You are mine, and I don't want anyone to interfere in our lives." She fell silent, feeling the walls of the house shrink even more. The love he promised evaporated, leaving only control. He no longer gave gifts, did not speak kind words, only instructions, demands, coldness. Emily realized that she had become a thing for him, beautiful but wordless. At night, lying in bed, she looked at the ceiling and remembered Jacob. His voice, his hands, his words. "The way I love you, no one else will love you." She didn't realize then how right he was. Mark didn't love her, he owned her. She lost her job, friends, freedom, and in return she received a golden cage where every step was under his gaze. One day she went to the mirror in her bedroom, well, looking at herself. Dress from Mark, jewelry from Mark, life from Mark. But in the eyes there was no Emily who planted roses and laughed with Jacob. She touched her face, feeling tears burning her cheeks. She chose this cage, thinking it would be salvation, but now she knew it was a mistake. And somewhere there, in Liberty, there was a man who truly loved her and whom she lost. Jacob Miller stood in front of an old garage on the outskirts of Liberty, clutching a set of keys. It had been 9 months since he started working for old Joe at the auto repair shop, and almost a year since his divorce from Emily. During this time, he saved every cent, lived with Kate, took part-time jobs, all for this day. The garage was small, shabby walls, a rusty sign, the smell of oil and metal. But this was the first workshop that he was able to rent with his savings. Today, he took a step forward. Trevor stood nearby, leaning against his truck, grinning at Jacob. "Well, master," he said, crossing his arms, "how do you feel?" "Weird," Jacob replied, looking at the garage. "It's like a dream. I can't believe this is mine." "Yours, brother," Trevor nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. "You worked like hell. Deserved it." "Thanks, Trev," Jacob said, turning to him. "If it weren't for you, I'd still be changing Joe's oil." "Okay," Trevor waved his hand. "I just gave it a push. You pulled it all out yourself. Let's go take a look inside." They entered the garage. The space was cramped. An old lift, a workbench, a couple of boxes of tools that Jacob had bought second-hand. There are oil stains on the floor and peeling paint on the walls. But for him, this was the beginning. He ran his hand over the workbench, feeling the rough surface, and smiled sincerely for the first time in a long time. "There's a lot of work here," Trevor said, looking around. "But a couple of hands, and there will be candy. When do you open?" "Next week," Jacob replied, opening a drawer of wrenches. "We need to put up a sign and lay out the tools." Joe promised to pick up a couple of clients. "Great," Trevor nodded, "and I'll drive my pickup truck first. The brakes squeak like hell. Will you fix it?" "Drive it tomorrow," Jacob laughed, looking at his friend. "The first client is free." "That's why I love you," Trevor said, grinning. "Okay, I'll go. If anything, call." He walked away, leaving Jacob alone. He sat down on an old chair, looking around the garage. The silence was soft, not oppressive, like in prison, and not cold, like in the house with Emily. This was his silence, the place where he could breathe. He took a notepad out of his pocket and began writing. A to-do list, tools to buy, ideas for a sign. Miller Fix is simple, but sonorous. He smiled, remembering how he drew the same name in a notebook as a child. In the evening, Kate stopped by to see his new kingdom. She came in with a thermos of coffee and a bag of sandwiches, looking around with curiosity. "What a hole, Jake," she said, putting the food on the workbench. "But you're whole. Congratulations." "Thank you, Kate," he replied, taking the sandwich. "This is just the beginning. We need to patch it up, but we can work." "You can," she nodded, sitting down on the box. "You are no longer the same person who came out of prison. I see it in your eyes." "Maybe so," he said, taking a sip of coffee. "I'm my own boss here. This brings me back." "Who were you before prison?" she asked, looking at him carefully. "Yes," he nodded, looking at his hands. "A guy who loved fixing cars and dreamed of his own business, who smiled for no reason." "You can smile now," Kate said, smiling to herself. "I saw how you looked at this garage. It's not just a job, Jake. It's you." He looked at her, feeling her words sink in. She was right. Here, among the tools and the smell of gasoline, he felt alive, not a shadow, not a former prisoner, but himself. He stood up, walked over to the lift, and ran his hand over the cold metal. "You know, Kate," he said quietly, "in prison I thought I had lost everything. Emily, herself, the future. But maybe I was wrong." "I wasn't mistaken," she answered, looking at him. "You've lost a lot, but not all. You're still here, and it's yours." He nodded, feeling the warmth of her support mingling with his own determination. The next morning he began to work, sweeping the floor, arranging his tools, and nailing the order board to the wall. The first client came 3 days later, neighbor Joe, with a stalled Chevrolet. Jacob fiddled with it for half a day, but when the car started up smoothly, he smiled like he hadn't smiled in years. "How much is it from me?" asked the client, an elderly man with a gray mustache. "$20, Jacob replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "And come again." "I'll come," the man nodded, holding out the money. "You're the right guy." Jacob took the bills, feeling their weight in his hand. This was the first money earned in his workshop, and it meant more than just pay. It was control over your life, your time, your future. In the evening, he hung up a sign, "Miller Fix," cut by Trevor from old metal. She was crooked, but her own. Clients came little by little, some on Joe's advice, some from Trevor. Jacob fixed brakes, changed oil, patched tires. He worked until dark, but the fatigue was pleasant, not oppressive, like in the prison laundry, but alive. He began to remember himself, the guy who repaired Dad's tractor, laughed with Emily over his dirty hands, dreamed of a workshop. Emily still flashed through his thoughts, but less often now, like a shadow rather than a knife. One evening, while closing the garage, he noticed a boy of about 10 years old hanging around the entrance with a bicycle. The tire was flat and the chain was dangling. "Hey, kid," Jacob called, wiping his hands. "What's wrong with the big one?" "It's broken," the boy answered, looking at him from under his brows. "But I don't have money." "Let's take a look," Jacob said, sitting down next to him. He took the bike, tightened the chain, and inflated the tire. "Ready? Go for a ride." "Is it true?" The boy was surprised, his eyes wide open. "Don't you have to pay?" "No need," Jacob smiled. "The first time is free. Come if you need anything." The boy drove away, shouting, "Thank you," and Jacob looked after him, feeling the warmth spreading inside him. Jacob Miller sat in the psychologist's small office, staring at the threadbare carpet under his feet. A year has passed since his release from prison, 9 months since the opening of the Miller Fix workshop. Life was getting better. Work was going on, clients were coming, Kate and Trevor were nearby. But there remained a heaviness inside, not anger, not pain, but something sticky that he couldn't name. Kate insisted on these sessions, and for the third month, now he came here once a week to Dr. Linda Hart, a woman with a soft voice and sharp eyes. "Jacob, what are you thinking about today?" Linda asked, putting down her pen. She sat opposite him in a chair with faded upholstery and looked at him calmly. "About the past," he answered, twirling an old lighter in his hands, a habit left over from his prison days. "About how it still catches you." "Emily?" she clarified, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," he nodded, looking to the side. "I'm not angry with her like I used to be. But it's there in my head. Doesn't go away." "It's okay," Linda said, crossing her arms. "You have been together since childhood. She is part of your history. How do you feel when you think about her?" "Emptiness," he answered, shrugging his shoulders. "And pity, probably. She betrayed me, but I don't want to hate her. Tired of this." "Hate is a heavy load," Linda nodded. "What would you like instead?" "Peace," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "I want her to get out of my head, so that I can live without looking back." "Then maybe we should forgive her?" she asked, leaning a little closer. "Not for her, but for you." "Forgive?" he asked, frowning. "After everything? She slept with Mark while I sat there. How to forgive this?" "Forgiveness is not an excuse, Jacob," Linda replied softly. "This does not mean that you have forgotten or accepted. This means that you let go of her actions so that they no longer hold you back. What do you feel about it? He fell silent, looking at the lighter. Forgive Emily? A year ago, he would have laughed or broken something. But now, he was tired of carrying this pain. She wasn't worth his peace. I don't know how to do this, he said finally, looking up. Where to start? Start with yourself, Linda answered. Tell yourself that you are not to blame for what she did, that her choices are her burden, not yours. You can try it right now. Just say it. Jacob exhaled, feeling his throat tighten. He closed his eyes and said quietly, It's not my fault that she chose Mark. It's her decision. I'm letting it go. The words sounded strange, almost alien, but with them something moved inside, as if a stone pressing on my chest became lighter. Linda smiled at the corner of her lips. How do you feel? She asked. I don't know, he answered, opening his eyes. It seems easier, but not completely. It's a process, she said. Don't expect everything to go away at once. But you started. To forgive is to free yourself, Jacob. You deserve it. He nodded, feeling her words sink in. The session ended, and he went outside, breathing in the cool air of liberty. For the first time in a long time, he didn't think of Emily with anger or longing, only with quiet acceptance. She was in the past, and he could move on. His new life was built slowly but surely. The Miller Fix workshop became a place where he felt at home. Customers came, not in droves, but steadily. Farmers with tractors, neighbors with pickup trucks, even that boy with a bicycle who now stopped by once a week. Jacob fixed cars, counted revenue, planned an expansion, a small corner for spare parts, maybe a second lift. The job gave him the control he had lost in prison, and he clung to it. Kate and Trevor remained his rock. In the evenings, they gathered on Kate's veranda drinking coffee, eating her pies, talking about trifles. Sometimes Joe, the old man from the workshop, joined them, telling stories about his youth. Jacob laughed, listened, felt part of something alive. It was not loud happiness, but it was warmth that was enough for him. Jake, when are you going to open the second garage? Trevor asked one day while munching on some pie. You already have a week's waiting list. Don't drive, Jacob answered, smiling. I'll finish this one first. But there are plans. That's right, Kate said, looking at him. You're in the right place, brother. I'm proud. Thank you, he replied, feeling how warm her words were. I couldn't have done it without you. He made plans. Buy a new workbench, hire an assistant, maybe even go somewhere with Trevor just to relax. For the first time in years, he looked forward instead of behind. Emily remained somewhere there, beyond the horizon, and he no longer wanted to look for her. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.